one thing that helped me, I think, the most is that I would always look for, well, who's really doing great in this field? And I came up with somebody that I knew was performing great, and I wanted to find out, okay, now what are they doing and how are they doing things? And I even went back to New York and talked to the fella. And
who was that?
I think that was Gerald Loeb.
Okay.
And he had been in the business with E.F. Hutton for years and years and years. And
he wrote Battle for Investment Survival?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was a very nice guy. We had a nice conversation back there. And later on, I think when he was getting ready to retire, he moved back to San Francisco, and he came down to see me one time. And so I remember asking him before he left, when he came down here, I said, by the way, do you always sell every stock and cut all the losses at 10%? And as he was walking out the door, he'd say, I would hope to be out of them much quicker than 10%. But it was obvious that his whole concept was, if it's not working, cut. Well, when I started in the business, I didn't know anybody in LA, and I didn't have any accounts, and I sold some mutual funds, and the fund at that time that was performing the best of all the others was Jack Dreyfus's fund. And so naturally I'm curious, well, what the heck is he doing that others aren't doing? And I sent away for several prospectus, a bunch of quarterly reports, and I went through and looked at all the new positions they'd taken for the last couple of years, and I got some charts, and I plotted where I thought that, because they showed in their prospectus or in their quarterly reports when they bought something, and I concluded, well, gee, these guys are chartists, because everything they bought, stock could go back and forth from 40 to 50, their average price was 51, and it wasn't just part of them, it was all of them. And I think I had, 40, 50 names. And so I had the little charts of all these things they bought. And that was my first start in that, realizing, well, if they're outrunning everybody else, there's got to be something to it. Well, this is the strange thing. If you start to understand it a little bit and you're looking for certain things, and the analysts are coming out with this report on this stock, and I'd look at these stocks, and 3 out of 4 of them I wouldn't buy. There wasn't much research that I could honestly use, even though the firm had their research. In fact, the most disappointing time I ever had is that after being at the firm for a few years, I decided I'd go back to New York and visit with, because Hayden Stone had a tremendous reputation. They'd been in business for probably 100 years. Barney Brook was a partner there and all that sort of thing. And I was really disappointed when I met some of the people and what I saw. So the market has always been very complicated, and there are some analysts that are very good, and I suppose there are some chartists that are very good, but the majority are not really up to par because it's so complicated. Yeah, I was in a downtown office, and we didn't have very many brokers there, but there were probably 10 or 12. And I was sitting out there with a whole bunch of others, and one of them, I don't even remember his name now, sat a couple of desks over from me, and he walked over and he said, hey, did you notice this stock? And I hadn't noticed it, and I took a look at it, and it was active and looking pretty well. And the irony of it is that I bought the stock, and the other guy bought it, and it went up 2-3 points or something, and he sold it, and the stock turned out to be very big. I think it doubled or something. But when somebody says, hey, look at this stock, I had a little chart book, and I could open it and look at it, and it either would look right or it wouldn't look right. And I would look for the chart, but the first thing I would do is look at what are the earnings each year for the last several years. And that stock was a big one, and the earnings had been doubling for the last couple of years, and the last couple of quarters were fine, and so the earnings were there, and the chart was there, and here it's active. So it fit everything, and I bought it. Now, the thing that's important about that isn't so much, well, gee, wasn't I so smart to buy it? Because if I hadn't had that rule, well, I'm going to hold it, until I get 6 months, it had one very sharp break, and normally, any one of us would have just had to get me out of there, and I sat through that, and it came out and doubled from there or something. So the rules help you, because it's a lot easier if you don't have to go by, well, how do I feel? Well, I like this stock, well, that's nice, but there better be something else that you can hang your hat on. And I would have rules, and I still today would love to, if I'm in something and it's halfway through and I'm trying to decide something, to have some sort of a rule that makes sense, rather than just saying, oh, well, I love the stock, or I'm going to hold it forever, or all this other stuff that goes on. Or how do I feel today about the market? Well, we knew the fund business, and we'd sold funds, and everybody kept saying, you should start a fund, you should start a fund. So, yeah, I did it, and I guess I really didn't want to, but I did it. And
but you had a great year in 1967, right? I mean,
yeah, and in 67, we actually set a record, I think, at that time. We were up 122% or something of that sort. And yeah, I remember that we knew we were heading to toe with somebody else, and in those last few days we were very aggressive and active, and we came out 2 or 3% ahead of the other person. But I imagine somebody else has broken that record by now. But at that time, I think that was, to make 122% in 1 year. And we had, I think, 40 stocks or something that doubled. I don't remember how many stocks in there, 50 or 60. And you'd had to have a lot of stocks. But it was a good bull market.
Right.
But we did pick most of the good ones. Right. So that kind of got us started. And it didn't help too much either, because most people didn't know about that as it was going on during the year. And then the 1st of January, when they found out about it, everybody went in and bought it. And of course, then it kind of struggled and slopped around and didn't do much. The market wasn't quite the same. So it's hard for people to make money. You got to do everything exactly right. Because I had recognized that Dreyfus was outperforming everybody else, and I did a study, and I sent away for their prospectus and plotted on charts where they bought everything and figured out. So I had a set of 50 or 60 stocks that Dreyfus had bought in the last couple of years, and where he bought them, and so this in effect was sort of like a little model book. And that was the thing, I think, that gave me the idea, well, let's go back and look at several years and pick out these things. And so we put together one of those as a result of, because I already had the models of all of what Dreyfus had been doing. The first product I created was a chart that has all the price and volume, but it has all the fundamentals, the sales, the earnings, the return on equity, all this sort of thing. So I put it all in one place where you could look at one and see all these variables. And nobody else had done it that way. You had some chart service, you got a chart, but not with all the fundamental stuff. Or you got a bunch of fundamental reports, maybe they have a little chart over here somewhere. So the product we created combined those two things, and it was unique and it was different. But all I was doing was taking all the variables that you'd want to see and put them together in one place. And I remember when we set out to sell that first book, I traveled around a lot of cities. And in Chicago, we sold a number of them, and the impression was always the same thing. They'd look at it, and 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 they'd say, well, this is really different. And yet they were kind of intrigued with it. And these would be fundamental guys, that are buying because of the PE ratio, and particularly in Chicago, and that drove me nuts. Everyone I talked to was the same thing, we're buying value and all of this stuff. But I'd show them this thing, and because it had earnings and everything else along there, they'd study it, and they'd say, well, we'll take it. And I think that some of them didn't know what they had, and some of them did, but it was just different. And nobody had something like that. Now, that helped us when they went into this period, and I think you mentioned this a minute ago, about you used to have the fixed commissions, and now they were going to go into now the lower the better, and you can negotiate and all of that. A lot of firms had trouble because who needs 5 reports on IBM? And so now all of a sudden, all these competitors that were having analysts and writing reports all over the place, they started to struggle. And we never lost an account because our product was totally unique and different. In fact, I can remember that where we cut off some people because they hadn't been paying what they had agreed to pay. And when they came back and wanted to start back up, you know, they had to catch up and everything. Well, they couldn't get that product anywhere else because it was completely unique, and they kind of liked it. And it was because we combined all the fundamentals with the technical in one place, and nobody else had done that.
As long as I've known you, you've said it's mostly fundamental.
It is.
So how do you reconcile that? Why do, I know we use charts, and as you said, you have to look at them, but what's so important about the fundamentals?
Well, I think the way that we have come up with some names are because we see the chart, and then we go back, and first thing I do when I see, whether it's chart or the old tapes that used to run across, if I see something that looks interesting, the first thing I do is how much are their earnings? And I'll go, what are the earnings right now in the current quarter, and the prior quarter, and the prior quarter? And then next, what are the earnings in the last 3 years? And then the sales, and then the return on equity. And I'll go through all this, and if it doesn't have it, I just forget it. So you sometimes can come up with the idea on the chart, but the thing that makes it go up is all the earnings and the product. And I'm not going to buy just because the chart looks good. So it's a combination of those things that, wow, it's acting great, and the demand is there, and the earnings are up 100%, and the return on equity is 40%. A couple of my biggest winners were stocks that had a 50% return on equity, and the earnings are growing 100%. And so it's those powerful fundamentals that make the stock double and triple. So actually, I think we're fundamentalists, and probably some of the better fundamentalists in the country, because we're looking for who's got the best product and the biggest earnings and biggest sales and biggest profit margins. And so some people see a chart and say, oh, well, these guys are chartists. Well, they don't. Everything I bought was bought as a combination. When I bought Syntex, I was buying those huge earnings. And, if you get earnings up 100, 200% for the last 2 or 3 quarters, you better look at the stock. And some of the big winners had that kind of characteristic there, and they happen to have the chart too. But it wasn't bought just because of the chart. Well, it's like baseball was one of my favorites as a young guy growing up. And you look at how come they pay $10 million a year to this player and this $5 million to that. Nobody's worth that. Well, somebody is. And they can count how many people come through the news, come through the stand and are in the park because they want to see old so-and-so pitching or whatever. That's why these guys get $5 million or $10 million or whatever, is because they win, and all of a sudden when they're playing, there's an extra 20% of people in the ballpark. They can measure it.
So a high PE is not necessarily a bad thing. It could be a good thing.
Well, yeah, it's a reflection that there's some real demand, because the public's not making the stock. The professionals are. And if the PE is 80, and if the stock is going up a lot, it's not the the earnings, and if the chart's not right or the earnings aren't there, forget it. Well, I did the research of what stocks had these big moves, and it was companies that had earnings up 100% or a return on equity of 40% and a chart. So there were just certain things I'm looking for. So if you come to me and the story's great, and man, they've got this product and it's great and all, and I ask about the earnings, and let's say they're not making money now, but this product is so great that they're going to make a lot of money. Well, I'll wait until the first quarter that they make money, and then I'll probably buy it. So it's just that I know that these stocks that went up, none of them started with a deficit. They started with earnings being up 50 or 100% or 200% or whatever. In fact, I was going through one of the models here a month or so ago, and I was shocked because I didn't remember it being this way. But the prior 3 quarters before that stock took off and really had its run, earnings were up 150, 200, 250%. I mean, a gimme, so to speak. It was there, and I didn't remember that because it was something from several years ago. But that's why this stock all of a sudden took off and was up 3-4 times. Concentration is an important thing, and that's how you make money in the stock. You know it well enough so you can. The ones I made some big money in, I had everything in that.
Right.
So I had to think, to put everything in that one stock.
Have the conviction to do that.
Yeah, and I'm also ready that if I'm wrong, to cut it, even if everything is in it. If I had some plan, maybe I might have thought, well, at some point, I could maybe start a little hardware store or something.